He walked into the bedroom expecting silence. Instead, he heard her voice, soft, warm, wrapping around the room like a lullaby. And the little bird flew home, because even the smallest wings can find their way. Grace's voice was gentle, melodic, the kind that made you forget for a moment how cruel the world could be, the kind of voice that could calm storms. She sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, a thick book open in her lap, its pages glowing under the soft lamplight. The little girl, Lily, was curled beneath a pale pink duvet, her lashes fluttering as she fought sleep. A tiny hand clutched the hem of Grace's cardigan as though anchoring herself to safety. And then the air changed. Grace didn't hear the footsteps at first, muffled by the thick Persian rug, but she felt them. A sudden shift in the atmosphere, a shadow stretching across the doorway. She looked up and froze. Ethan Cross stood there. He wasn't just a man. He was a presence. 6 feet of sculpted steel in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. Black hair slicked back, jaw cut like a blade, and eyes, cold, sharp, blue like glacial ice. Those eyes locked on her like a sniper's sight. The story died on her lips. No fairy tales. His voice was low, lethal, slicing through the still air. Grace blinked, disoriented. "Excuse me?" "I said." He stepped inside, slow and deliberate, each word measured like a judge delivering a sentence. "I told you this morning. No fairy tales. Not in my house." Grace swallowed hard. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "But she couldn't sleep. I thought—" "That's the problem." His tone cracked like thunder. "You thought. I gave rules, Ms. Morales, and you broke them." Her spine stiffened despite the fear clawing at her throat. "With respect, Mr. Cross, she's a child. Children need stories." "Not mine," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Pack your things. You're done." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. She stared at him, wide-eyed, her breath catching in her chest. Fired? For this? Lily stirred, sensing the storm in the room. Her tiny voice trembled. "Daddy?" Ethan's expression softened. Barely, for his daughter. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." Grace's heart squeezed as Lily whimpered and reached for her. But Ethan's gaze was back on her now, hard and unyielding. "I don't repeat myself." His tone dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Leave. Now." For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was deafening, except for Lily's soft sniffle. Grace rose slowly, her knees weak, the storybook slipping from her fingers and landing with a muted thud on the rug. Her hands shook as she gathered her tote bag from the corner of the room. She hesitated at the door, casting one last look at the little girl she'd spent the entire day coaxing out of her shell. Lily's big brown eyes were glassy, confused, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket like a lifeline. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the endless marble hallway like a retreat drumbeat. Behind her, the door clicked shut. And just like that, her first day at the Cross estate ended in ruins. The night air slapped her face as she stepped outside. Cold, damp, carrying the salty bite of Puget Sound. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. She'd worked with children for 5 years. Nannying wasn't just a job for Grace. It was a calling. She'd soothed teething babies, handled toddler tantrums like a pro, navigated divorce drama, and spoiled rich kids with patience and grace. But this? Fired on day one for reading a bedtime story? It was absurd. She reached the curb and sat on the bench, the glow of the Cross mansion burning behind her like a cruel reminder. Pulling out her phone, she opened her email to draft a note to the agency. Dear Ms. Harris, thank you for connecting me with the Cross family. Unfortunately, her fingers hovered, her throat tightened. She thought of Lily, her tiny frame curled under that pink duvet, trembling from a nightmare Grace would never know about. Grace bit her lip hard. She hated leaving like this, but she couldn't fight a man like Ethan Cross. He wasn't just wealthy. He was power personified. With a sigh, she shoved her phone back in her bag and walked toward the bus stop, her heels clicking on wet pavement. As the city swallowed her, one thought burned in her mind. What kind of man forbids bedtime stories? Back at the mansion, silence pressed heavy against the walls. Ethan sat in his study, a glass of scotch sweating in his hand, the amber liquid catching the glow of the Seattle skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He tried to focus on the spreadsheets glowing on his screen, tried to ignore the faint memory of Grace's voice drifting like smoke in the hallway. He hated how it made him feel, unsteady, vulnerable. He'd built his life on control. Every variable calculated, every risk mitigated. Emotions were liabilities, attachments, weaknesses. He'd learned that the hard way. Rules existed for a reason, and Grace had broken them. End of story. Or so he told himself. The clock ticked past midnight. Then, a scream. Ethan shot up, heart slamming against his ribs. Another scream, high-pitched, panicked. "Daddy!" He bolted up the grand staircase, 2 steps at a time, his pulse pounding like war drums. Lily's room was a storm of shadows. She sat bolt upright in bed, sobbing, clutching her blanket like a shield. "Baby!" He knelt beside her, breathless. "Lily, what's wrong? What happened?" "Bad dream," she hiccuped between sobs. "The monsters!" "There are no monsters, sweetheart. Daddy's here." He smoothed her damp hair, his fingers awkward and trembling. "You're safe, I promise." But the sobs didn't stop. Her tiny shoulders shook, her cries slicing through his armor like razors. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking with desperation. "I want Grace." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. "She's not here," he said gently. "But Daddy's here. Daddy will—" She shoved him away, her little hands surprisingly strong. "No! I want Grace. She tells stories. She makes the monsters go away." Ethan froze. The words gutted him, raw and merciless. He could sign billion-dollar deals without flinching, negotiate mergers that left titans trembling. But right now, faced with his daughter's tears, he felt helpless, useless. For the first time in years, Ethan Cross didn't have the answer. He grabbed his phone, dialed the agency. "She left," the woman said briskly, her voice tinny through the speaker. "Filed for reassignment." "No." His tone dropped like a blade. "Find her." "Sir, it's almost midnight." He hung up, yanked on his coat. If Lily needed Grace, then Grace was coming back, even if he had to drag her across the city himself. The rain came down in silver sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and gold. Ethan gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline, his jaw set, his pulse hammering with every mile he devoured. The wipers thrashed back and forth, but nothing cleared the storm raging in his chest. What the hell was he doing? He wasn't the kind of man who chased people. Employees came and went, always replaceable, always irrelevant. But Grace Morales? His daughter's sobs still echoed in his ears. Lily's tiny voice, breaking on that name. I want Grace, not him, not her father. The man who would burn the world to keep her safe. She wanted the nanny he'd fired like she was nothing. Ethan's hands clenched on the wheel. He should have anticipated this, should have stayed detached like he always did. But Lily was all that mattered. And tonight, for the first time in years, Ethan Cross was about to beg. He reached Capitol Hill just past 1. The neighborhood was a far cry from his glass-walled fortress. Narrow streets slick with rain, old brick buildings sagging under the weight of time. Streetlights buzzed and flickered like tired sentinels. He killed the engine outside a squat apartment complex with faded teal paint peeling like old wallpaper. Checked the address the agency had given him. Apartment 2B. His chest tightened as he stepped out, rain immediately soaking his tailored wool coat. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something fried from a diner down the block. He pushed through the rusted gate, boots splashing in shallow puddles, and climbed the cracked concrete steps, 2 at a time. Then he stopped, because through the yellowed glass of a ground-floor window, he saw her. Grace. She sat cross-legged on a worn rug, her hair pulled into a loose braid, damp strands curling against her cheeks. Her cardigan clung to her slender frame, threadbare at the elbows. Around her, half a dozen kids huddled close, their faces glowing in the lamplight, as they hung on her every word. And then, Grace said, her voice warm and lilting, the little fox found her way home. Because no matter how far you wander, someone is always waiting for you. The children sighed in unison, melting into the magic of her story. Ethan stood frozen, rain dripping from his lashes, something sharp and unfamiliar twisting in his gut. He'd assumed she'd storm home and lick her wounds. Instead, she was here, at 1 in the morning, reading to children who clearly weren't hers, giving them a piece of herself he'd never even glimpsed in his house. When the story ended, the kids clapped and hugged her, their tiny arms wrapping around her like ivy. Grace laughed softly, kissing the top of a little girl's head before ushering them toward a narrow hallway. Ethan's throat felt tight. He'd been so wrong about her. So damn wrong. And that, more than anything, shook him to his core. He was still standing there when the door creaked open and Grace stepped out, balancing a chipped mug in one hand and fumbling with her keys in the other. She nearly dropped both when she saw him. Mr. Cross? Her voice cracked on his name, eyes wide with disbelief. What are you doing here? Ethan took a breath, the rain slicking his hair to his forehead. Grace. His voice was rough, uneven. I need you to come back. Her jaw fell. She blinked, like maybe the rain was messing with her hearing. Excuse me? I fired you, he said bluntly. And I was wrong. Lily needs you. Grace stared at him, laughter bubbling up, sharp, incredulous. Are you serious? After the way you spoke to me? I don't apologize often. His words were clipped, like each one cost him. But I'll say it now. I was out of line. Grace crossed her arms, chin lifting in defiance despite the shiver that ran through her. So now you want me back because What? You realized bedtime stories aren't a federal crime? Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Something like that. Her eyes narrowed. No, Mr. Cross, not something like that. You humiliated me in front of your daughter. You treated me like— She trailed off, shaking her head. And now you think you can just show up in the middle of the night, wave your black card, and everything's fine? Rainwater trickled down the hard line of his jaw as he met her glare. Yes, he said simply, because I don't care about fine. I care about my daughter. She cried herself sick tonight because you weren't there. So if pride's what's stopping you, crush it. For her. The silence between them vibrated like a live wire. Grace's heart thudded so hard it hurt. Finally, she blew out a shaky breath. If I come back, I do it my way. No more lists. No more bans. Lily gets to be a child. Ethan's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed to control, to command, but Lily's tear-streaked face burned behind his eyes. He nodded once, curt and absolute. Deal. The ride back to the mansion was a study in contrasts. Grace sat rigid in the buttery leather passenger seat of his black Bentley, her soaked cardigan clinging to her like second skin. The car smelled faintly of cedar and something darker. Expensive cologne, restrained and masculine. Outside, the rain softened to mist, Seattle's skyline glittering like a constellation of broken dreams. Ethan drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. But every so often, his gaze flicked sideways, at the curve of her profile, the way droplets clung to her lashes like tiny jewels. He told himself it meant nothing. Just observation. That was all. So why did it feel like a fault line cracking open under his feet? When they stepped into the mansion, the hush was almost oppressive. Grace's boots squeaked faintly on marble as she followed him up the sweeping staircase, her breath catching when they reached Lily's door. The little girl was curled in a tight ball, cheeks still damp, her tiny fist clutching the hem of her blanket like armor. Grace's heart splintered. She slipped inside without a word, her voice soft as velvet. Hey, baby girl. Lily stirred, lashes fluttering, and then those brown eyes blinked open. When they focused on Grace, something like sunrise broke across her face. Gracie. Her voice was a whisper of pure relief. Grace knelt, stroking the child's hair as Lily burrowed against her. Shh, I'm here now. No more monsters, okay? Story? Lily murmured, already melting into sleep. Grace smiled through the ache in her chest. Of course, sweetheart. Once upon a time. Ethan lingered in the doorway, unseen, his throat thick as her voice curled through the dark like a spell. And for the first time in years, the Cross Mansion felt almost human. The story ended softly, like a candle flickering out. Grace closed the book, brushed a kiss over Lily's hair, and tucked the blankets snug around her tiny shoulders. The little girl was already breathing evenly, a trace of a smile playing on her lips. Grace stood slowly, smoothing her damp cardigan, and turned, nearly colliding with Ethan in the doorway. He didn't move, just stood there, his gaze fixed on his daughter, something raw and unfamiliar shadowing his face. She sleeps, Grace whispered. He nodded once. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Thank you. She hesitated, expecting him to retreat into his fortress of silence. Instead, he surprised her. Come downstairs, he said, already turning away. You'll catch pneumonia in that sweater. The kitchen was cavernous, gleaming steel and marble, but it felt strangely intimate under the soft glow of recessed lights. Ethan moved with unhurried precision, shrugging off his jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt as he filled the kettle. Grace perched on the edge of a stool, suddenly aware of the rain-damp curls framing her face, the chill still clinging to her skin. "Tea?" he asked, without looking at her. She blinked. "Tea? Would be nice." He set 2 mugs on the counter, his movements efficient, almost too controlled, as though control was the only thing holding him together. Grace studied him in the silence. The billionaire who'd snarled at her hours ago now stood barefoot on cold marble, sleeves pushed up, veins tracing his forearms like blue lightning. For the first time, he looked human. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, as if confessing to the dark. "You asked earlier why I hate stories." She stilled, fingers tightening around the edge of the stool. "Yes." His jaw flexed. "My wife wrote them." The words dropped like stones into water, rippling outward. Grace's breath caught. "She was brilliant," he continued, staring into the swirling steam. "Children's books, worlds of magic and wonder. She believed stories could save people." A humorless smile twisted his mouth. "I told her reality mattered more." Grace's chest ached. "What happened?" His eyes lifted, glacial blue, stripped bare now. "Car accident. 3 years ago." The kettle hissed softly. Neither moved. "I couldn't," he broke off, swallowing hard. "I couldn't read to Lily. Couldn't even look at those books without—" His voice fractured, a hairline crack in steel. "So, I banned them. Thought if I erased the stories, I could erase the pain." Grace's throat burned. "But you didn't erase it," she said gently. "You just passed it on." His gaze snapped to hers, something raw sparking there. For a long moment, silence hummed between them like a live wire. Then the kettle whistled, shattering the spell. Ethan poured the tea, sliding a mug toward her without another word. But when his fingers brushed hers, the contact was electric, brief, searing, and gone too soon. Days blurred into weeks. The mansion, once a mausoleum, began to breathe again. Laughter threaded through its halls like golden thread. Lily bloomed under Grace's care, her giggles tumbling like wind chimes, her nightmares shrinking into shadows. Ethan watched from the periphery, silent, absorbing. He told himself it was for Lily. That was the script, he repeated. But late at night, when he lingered by the nursery door just to hear Grace's voice curling like smoke through the dark, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Then came the school play, a modest auditorium packed with proud parents and the scent of paper programs. Grace knelt beside Lily backstage, smoothing the little blue cape tied at her shoulders. "You ready, superstar?" Grace whispered. Lily nodded, eyes shining. "You'll watch me?" "Always." Grace pressed a kiss to her hair. From the aisle, Ethan watched them, an ache coiling in his chest, so fierce it almost unmoored him. The curtain rose, and there was Lily, standing center stage, delivering her lines in a clear, steady voice that made Ethan's throat tighten. "Once upon a time," she began, "a little bird found her wings." The audience chuckled, charmed. Ethan's vision blurred. That line, that story, it was Grace's. Applause thundered as Lily took her bow, cheeks flushed with triumph. She spotted Ethan in the crowd and waved, pride radiating like sunlight. He clapped until his palms stung, but his gaze drifted inevitably to Grace, waiting in the wings, her smile soft and luminous. And in that moment, something inside him shifted, a tectonic crack in the bedrock of his control. They found each other outside as dusk bled into violet. Grace leaned against the sleek black Bentley, her hair a tumble of gold in the fading light. "She was amazing," she said, voice warm with pride. "She was," Ethan murmured, "because of you." Grace flushed, ducking her gaze. "It's what I do." "No," he stepped closer, his presence wrapping around her like a storm. "It's more than that, and I don't want this to be temporary." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Move in." His voice was steady, decisive, the tone of a man used to getting what he wants, except for the flicker of something almost like vulnerability in his eyes. "Full-time. Travel with us when needed. Whatever it takes to keep her happy." Grace stared, stunned. "That's a lot." "Think about it." His gaze softened, the edge of command blurring into something else. "No pressure, just don't say goodbye yet." Before she could respond, a small voice piped up behind them. "Gracie, did you see me?" Lily barreled into Grace's arms, clutching her little trophy. Grace hugged her tight, her pulse a wild staccato as Ethan watched, his expression unreadable, his future suddenly tilting on an axis he'd sworn would never shift. As they walked toward the car, the city lights glittered like scattered promises. Grace thought she was hired to care for a little girl, but maybe, just maybe, she was about to change a man's life, too. The offer hung between them like a live wire. Move in. Full time. Travel when needed. Grace opened her mouth, then closed it again, words tangling in her throat. Lily tugged at her sleeve, beaming up with that gap-toothed grin that could melt glaciers. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" the little girl asked, her voice bubbling with hope. Grace swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "We'll see, sweetheart." Ethan's gaze never left hers, something unreadable simmering in the blue depths of his eyes. The ride back to the mansion was a quiet storm. Lily chattered about the play from the back seat, her little voice a bright ribbon looping through the dark. Grace nodded and murmured responses, but her mind spun like a wheel with no brakes. Live in. Under the same roof as Ethan Cross. The thought sent a shiver through her, not entirely from fear. When they pulled into the sweeping driveway, Ethan killed the engine and turned to her, his tone controlled, almost businesslike. "Think about it tonight," he said. "Let me know in the morning." Grace nodded, heart pounding so loud she barely heard the rest of Lily's chatter. But long after she tucked Lily into bed and slipped into the guest room for what might be her last night there, Ethan's voice followed her like a shadow. Move in. The decision haunted her dreams. By morning, she still didn't have an answer. Until Lily bounded into her room in a flurry of pink pajamas and bedhead curls, clutching a crayon drawing in both hands. "It's us," she declared proudly, thrusting the paper toward Grace. 3 stick figures, one tiny with a crooked smile, one tall with wild hair, and one broad-shouldered in a suit, stood beneath a shaky rainbow. Above them, Lily had scrawled in big, wobbly letters, "Our family." Grace's throat tightened. That was the moment she said yes. Moving day came fast. Grace packed her modest belongings, a battered suitcase, a box of books, a chipped mug from college, and returned to the Cross estate. where a live-in suite waited behind a gleaming white door. The room was bigger than her entire apartment. Cream walls, a king bed draped in soft linen, French doors opening onto a balcony that overlooked the gardens. It was surreal. Grace trailed her fingers over the polished dresser, a hollow laugh escaping her. All this for bedtime stories? Ethan's voice came from behind, low and even. You'll find it's more than that. She spun, startled. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Lily's shriek of delight echoed down the hall, shattering the tension. Gracie! Come see my room. Grace smiled, brushing past him, pretending her pulse wasn't rioting. Life under the same roof shifted like tectonic plates, slow at first, then with jolting force. Grace carved new routines, morning pancakes instead of sterile protein bars, bedtime stories layered with laughter, afternoons spent chasing Lily through the gardens while the dog barked like mad. And Ethan watched. From doorways, from the edges of rooms, his gaze trailing her like a silent confession he'd never let slip. Sometimes she caught it, on the curve of her smile as she braided Lily's hair, on the tilt of her head as she knelt to tie a shoe. He'd look away, sharp and guilty, but the heat lingered, humming in the air like static. The first crack came one rainy evening. Grace padded into the kitchen in fuzzy socks and a borrowed sweater, intent on cocoa. She stopped dead at the sight of Ethan leaning against the marble island, sleeves rolled, whiskey glass in hand. "You're up late," he said, voice velvet over gravel. "So are you," she countered, moving past him to the kettle. Steam curled upward as silence stretched. She could feel him behind her, heat rolling off that immovable frame, the air thick with something she didn't dare name. When she finally turned, his gaze pinned her like a moth to glass. "Grace," he said quietly, "you've changed this house." The words punched the breath from her lungs. She forced a shaky smile. "It's not the house that matters. It's Lily." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. Close enough that she could smell the dark spice of his cologne, feel the slow burn of his presence. "But it's not just Lily." Her pulse thundered. His eyes held hers, blue fire in the dim light. Then he blinked, tearing away, jaw tight. "Good night," he muttered, and was gone, leaving her trembling in the echo of what almost was. The next morning, the headlines hit. Mystery woman moves into tech tycoon's home. Grace stared at the glowing screen, coffee turning to acid in her stomach. A grainy photo, snapped outside Lily's school, splashed across the gossip site. Her holding Lily's hand. Ethan, a step behind, sunglasses hiding nothing. By noon, it was everywhere. The whispers started at pickup. Parents clustered in little knots, their smiles too sweet, eyes too sharp. One woman, lacquered and brittle, leaned close and murmured, "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. They never marry the help." Grace burned, but nothing seared like what came next. A charity gala invitation landed in Ethan's inbox. Black tie, press everywhere. Lily's name on the program for a children's fundraiser performance. And Ethan, without asking, told Grace she'd attend. Her stomach dropped. "Ethan, I can't." "You can," he said smoothly. "And you will. Lily wants you there." Grace stared at him, anger and something more tangled tight in her chest. "You don't get to order me around." "Then don't think of it as an order," he said, eyes glinting. Think of it as a favor. For her. She hated that it worked. The night of the gala bloomed cold and glittering, the city pulsing with lights like a jeweled heartbeat. Grace smoothed the borrowed black dress over her hips, her reflection a stranger in the gilt-edged mirror. The gown whispered elegance, but her hands shook as she fastened the last clasp on the slim silver necklace, a gift from Ethan's assistant, with a polite note. Mr. Cross thought this would suit the occasion. Her pulse thudded like a drum. She wasn't made for this world of champagne and silk, where smiles were weapons and gossip traveled faster than light. But Lily wanted her there. That was the only reason she'd said yes. Downstairs, the Bentley purred like a predator. Ethan waited beside it in a suit cut to perfection, black tie knotted with ruthless precision. The sight of him, tall, commanding, radiating quiet power, punched the breath from her lungs. His eyes found her. For a fraction of a second, something raw flickered there, then vanished, replaced by a cool nod. "You're late," he said softly, holding the door. "You didn't give me much notice," she shot back, sliding into the leather interior. His mouth curved, almost a smile, almost dangerous. The drive was a study in silence, tension coiling like a serpent between them. The hotel ballroom glittered under chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen rain. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns moved in elegant currents, laughter ringing like champagne flutes, clinking. Grace clutched her clutch like a shield, acutely aware of the stares grazing her skin. She heard the whispers, half hidden behind jeweled hands, sharp as razors. That's her, the nanny. Typical, isn't it? Her cheeks burned. Then a voice, honeyed and venom-laced, curled around her ear. "Well, so the rumors are true." Grace turned and froze. The woman was beautiful in a brittle, blade-sharp way. Diamond earrings, lips painted the color of blood, and eyes, icy blue, disturbingly familiar. "Vivian," Ethan said smoothly, appearing at Grace's side like a dark shield. His arm brushed hers, warm and solid. "I wasn't aware you'd be here." "You never are," the woman purred, sliding her gaze over Grace like a scalpel. "And this must be the help." Grace stiffened, heat lashing her veins. Before she could speak, Ethan's voice dropped to steel. "She's Lily's nanny," he said evenly. "And she's here because my daughter wanted her here." Vivian's brows arched, her smile knife-thin. "Of course. How very modern." Then, with a final swipe of her diamond gaze, she drifted away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and poison in her wake. Grace exhaled slowly, fists clenched at her sides. "Don't," Ethan murmured, his voice low enough for her ears alone. "She wants a reaction. Don't give her one." Grace swallowed hard, fury and humiliation tangling in her chest. "I didn't sign up for this." His eyes burned into hers, blue fire under control that looked a lot like pain. "Neither did I." The evening dragged, a blur of speeches and auctions and cameras that seemed magnetized to Ethan's every move. Grace stuck close to Lily during her performance, pride and ache swelling when the little girl sang her heart out under the glittering lights. When it was finally over, Grace slipped outside, lungs clawing for air. The city wind was sharp, tugging at her hair, tasting of rain and exhaust. She didn't hear him approach, just felt the shift, the quiet gravitational pull that was Ethan Cross. "You disappeared," he said softly, stepping into the pool of lamplight where she stood. His tie was loosened now, the perfect armor of his suit rumpled like he'd been through a war. Grace folded her arms, chin lifting. I needed a break from the circus. His mouth twitched. You handled it well. She laughed, brittle as glass. Sure, if by well you mean standing there while your, whatever she is, tries to slice me open with a smile. His jaw flexed. Vivian is Lily's aunt. She's protective. Protective? Grace's voice sharpened. She treated me like I was trash on her shoe. His gaze locked on hers, flint and fire. You're not trash. Don't ever let anyone make you believe that. The words hit like a blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, the dark sweep of his hair, the hard line of his jaw, the glint of city lights in his eyes. Grace. His voice was different now, low, rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. She felt it before she processed it, the lean of his body, the warmth radiating through the inch of air that still separated them. Her heart stopped. And then a door banged somewhere, and the spell shattered. Ethan stepped back, breath unsteady, jaw locked as though chaining something feral inside. I'll get the car, he said, his voice flat again. Grace stared after him, her pulse rioting, her world tilting dangerously on its axis. Back at the mansion, the silence screamed. Lily was asleep within minutes, blissfully oblivious. Grace lingered by the bedroom door, her hands trembling as she turned the knob and slipped into the hallway. She didn't mean to pause outside the library, didn't mean to glance in, but she did, and saw him. Ethan, sitting in the half-light, jacket off, head bowed in his hands like a man undone. Something cracked inside her, sharp and aching. She should walk away. She should. Instead, she stepped inside, heart hammering, drawn by something she didn't dare name. The fire in the library crackled softly, amber light licking the edges of shadow. Ethan didn't look up as Grace crossed the threshold, but his voice came, low and frayed. You should be asleep. I could say the same to you. He huffed out something that wasn't quite a laugh. Sleep and I aren't on speaking terms. Grace hesitated, then moved closer, the scent of old books and cedar smoke wrapping around her like a memory. He lifted his head, and the sight of his face, stripped bare of its usual steel, punched the breath from her lungs. He looked tired, haunted, like a man fighting ghosts in a house that had too many rooms for silence. Rough night? She murmured. His eyes met hers, blue fire flickering in the dim. You shouldn't have had to go through that. Vivian, the cameras, all of it. Grace sank into the chair opposite him, her pulse a wild staccato. I'm a big girl. I can handle whispers. You shouldn't have to, he said again, sharper this time, like the words scraped raw on the way out. She tilted her head, studying him. Ethan, why does it matter so much to you? The question hung there, heavy as thunder. For a long moment, he didn't answer, just stared into the fire like it held all the truths he'd buried. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to hers, and something in his eyes made her heart stop. Because I'm not used to anyone staying, he said quietly. Not since. He swallowed, the muscle in his jaw ticking. When Ava died, I told myself I'd never let anyone close again. Safer that way. For me. For Lily. Grace's throat tightened. That sounds lonely. His mouth curved, bitter, self-mocking. It was supposed to be. But then you walked in with your stories and your stubbornness, and you— His voice broke, ragged as wind through broken glass. You changed everything. The silence that followed was alive, thrumming, their heartbeats echoing in its hollow spaces. Grace felt it, the pull, fierce and terrifying, dragging her towards something she couldn't name. Ethan! Her voice was a whisper, a plea, a warning. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, like a predator closing in, not to devour, but to surrender. When he stopped in front of her, the firelight carved shadows across the hard planes of his face, painting him in bronze and gold. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a damp curl from her cheek, fingertips lingering against her skin like a secret. "Tell me to stop," he said hoarsely. "And I will." Her breath caught, her pulse slamming so hard it hurt. She opened her mouth, and the phone rang. The sound cleaved the moment in two. Ethan jerked back, muttering a curse as he snatched the phone from the desk. "Cross!" Grace turned away, dragging air into her lungs, every nerve screaming. She didn't mean to listen, but the words hit like shards of ice. "Yes, I know what it looks like." Ethan's voice, sharp now, layered in steel again. "The nanny is nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing. My personal life isn't up for negotiation, but if this deal hinges on appearances, I'll handle it." Grace's stomach dropped, the world tilting like a floor collapsing under her feet. Nothing. The word echoed, brutal and hollow, shredding every fragile thing that had bloomed between them. She didn't wait to hear more, just slipped out, silent as shadow, the cold of that word clawing into her bones. By morning, her decision was made. She packed quietly, hands trembling as she folded Lily's favorite sweater into the laundry basket for the last time. Her chest cracked when Lily's sleepy voice piped up from the doorway. "Gracie, where are you going?" Grace forced a smile that felt like glass splintering in her throat. "Just taking care of something, sweetheart. I'll see you before school." She couldn't look at Ethan as she passed his office, though she felt his gaze, razor sharp, cutting into her back like a question he'd never expected to ask. Because if she looked, she might shatter completely. As the car carried her away from the mansion's iron gates, Grace pressed her forehead to the glass, tears burning like acid. She'd walked into Ethan Cross's world thinking she was just a nanny. Now she knew the truth. She was nothing. And that was why she had to leave, before she lost herself completely. Grace thought she could keep her heart out of this. She was wrong. But walking away might break her in ways even Ethan Cross couldn't fix. The mansion was too quiet. Ethan stood in the doorway of Grace's empty room, the silence pressing down like a fist on his chest. The bed was neatly made, the dresser bare, the faint scent of lavender clinging to the air like a ghost. She was gone. He gripped the doorframe, muscles locked against the roar building inside him. Grace had walked out without a word, without warning, without giving him the chance to— To what? Stop her? Convince her to stay? Confess things he'd spent 3 years burying under steel and ambition? His jaw clenched until it ached. He'd heard the front door earlier, the soft click, the almost soundless retreat down the marble hall. He'd told himself she was running an errand, that she'd be back before Lily woke. But the truth was here, stark and cold in this empty room. She wasn't coming back. He found Lily curled on the living room rug, building castles out of blocks, her small brow furrowed in concentration. When she looked up, her smile was bright, trusting. "Where's Gracie?" she asked. Ethan swallowed hard, the words catching like glass in his throat. She had to go. For how long? Lily's voice was innocent, guileless, full of hope that felt like a knife twisting between his ribs. He crouched, forcing steadiness into his tone. "I'm not sure, baby, but I promise, Daddy's here." Her mouth trembled. "I want Gracie." The sound broke him clean in two. Hours blurred into a haze of phone calls and slammed doors. He called the agency. They had nothing. Checked her suite again, rifled through empty drawers like a man possessed. Finally, his gaze snagged on a scrap of paper on the nightstand. Grace's handwriting, looping, steady, every letter carved into his bones the second he saw it. "Thank you for everything. Please tell Lily I love her stories." G. That was all. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just goodbye, neat and quiet as a knife slipped between ribs. Ethan crumpled the note in his fist, the words burning into his skin like acid. No, this wasn't how it ended. He strode to his desk, yanking open drawers until his fingers closed around the cold edge of resolve. He wasn't letting her vanish. Not when Lily cried herself to sleep whispering Grace's name. Not when the echo of her laughter still haunted every damn hallway. He had resources, power, people who owed him favors measured in blood. If Grace thought she could disappear into the sprawl of Seattle and become nothing more than a memory, she didn't know Ethan Cross. By nightfall, his car tore through rain-slick streets, the city a blur of neon bleeding into shadow. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, to follow the faint thread of hope winding through the dark. But under the fury, under the raw ache clawing at his chest, one thought pulsed like a wound. Why? Why had she left without a word, without looking him in the eye? And then the answer struck, brutal and unrelenting. Vivian's sneer, the headlines, the whispers, dripping poison into every corner of Grace's new world. He should have protected her, shielded her from the vultures circling his name. Instead, he'd thrown her into the fire. And if he didn't find her soon, he'd burn with the wreckage. His phone buzzed. David's name glowed on the screen. "I found her," his friend said without preamble. "Or at least where she's been staying. Small place in Fremont, near the canal." Ethan's pulse kicked like a war drum. "Text me the address." "Ethan." David hesitated. "Think before you do this. If she left, she had a reason." "Yeah," Ethan said, voice flat steel. "And I'm going to hear it from her lips." He killed the call, the engine growling as he gunned it toward the waterfront, the storm inside him rising like a tide that could drown cities. Grace's apartment flickered to life in his headlights. A narrow brick building huddled between two coffee shops, windows glowing soft and golden against the rain-streaked dark. He killed the engine, sitting in the quiet hum of tension, his pulse pounding like a trapped thing in his chest. For 3 days, he'd walked through hell, Lily's tears, his own fury, the hollow echo of a house stripped of laughter. 3 days of imagining her smile somewhere else, aimed at someone else. The thought was a blade twisting in his gut. He shoved the car door open, rain slamming against his face like ice, and strode toward the entrance, his breath a low growl in his throat. Because tonight, the running ended. Rain hammered the streets like war drums as Ethan climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, each step vibrating with the pulse pounding in his veins. When he reached 3B, he didn't knock gently. His fist cracked against the door, sharp, relentless. For a moment, nothing. Then soft footsteps, a pause, and finally, the click of a deadbolt sliding free. The door opened. Grace stood there. Her hair was damp, curling wildly around her face, her sweatshirt slung loose over worn jeans. No makeup, no armor, just Grace, eyes wide and dark with something he couldn't name. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then her voice, low, tight, broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting, the door swinging shut behind him. Rain slicked his hair, his coat dripping onto the threadbare rug. "Looking for you," he said, his tone a blade wrapped in silk. "For 3 days, Grace. Do you have any idea what that was like? Lily," his voice fractured, raw. "She cried herself sick." Grace flinched, her arms tightening across her chest like a shield. "Don't!" "Don't what?" He prowled closer, every line of his body thrumming with a fury he barely leashed. "Don't ask why you vanished without a word? Don't demand a reason?" Her chin lifted, defiance trembling like a candle in wind. "You don't need a reason. You made it clear what I am." His brows slammed together. "What the hell does that mean?" Grace laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "Don't play innocent. I heard you, Ethan. That night in the library." Memory slammed into him like a truck. The phone call, his voice like steel, the words he'd spit to keep a multi-billion-dollar deal from crumbling under scandal. The nanny is nothing. His stomach turned to ice. "Grace?" "No." Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp with pain. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to kiss me with words 1 minute and strip me down to nothing the next because your precious empire might wobble." The heat in his chest surged, wild and uncontrollable. "You think that's what this is? A game? Damage control?" Her silence was a knife. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his breath harsh, his eyes burning like blue fire. "You're not nothing. Damn it, Grace. You're the only thing in that house that felt alive. You're the only reason Lily smiles. The only reason I—" He broke off, his fists curling at his sides. "The only reason you what?" she whispered, her voice shaking. His jaw clenched, 1,000 walls crashing inside him. "The only reason I remember what it feels like to want something that isn't power, isn't profit, something that matters." The words hung between them, molten and dangerous. Grace stared at him, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Ethan!" He reached for her hand, hesitated, then gripped it like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. "Come back." His voice was low, ragged. "Please." Her heart twisted so hard it hurt. God, how easy it would be to fall, to let herself drown in the storm of him. But then Vivian's voice slithered through her memory, venom soft. "They never marry the help." And Ethan's own words, cold and surgical. "The nanny is nothing." Grace pulled her hand free like it burned. "I can't." His face went still, a blade frozen mid-strike. "Can't. Or won't." "Both," she whispered. The silence stretched, jagged as broken glass. Then Ethan's phone shattered it with a shrill ring. He ignored it. It rang again. And again. With a curse, he snatched it up, voice slicing like steel. "Cross." Grace turned away, hugging herself against the chill bleeding into her bones. She didn't mean to listen, but the words landed like stones. "Vivian," Ethan bit out. "No, I don't give a damn what the board says. The deal closes on Monday, with or without their blessing." He stopped, listening, fury sparking in the air like static. "Grace is none of their business." Her breath hitched. "Yes," he snapped. "I know what the headlines say. I don't care. If they think I'm walking away from a merger because of gossip, they've forgotten who the hell I am." The call ended with a brutal swipe. He stood there, shoulders rigid, rain still clinging to his hair like shards of glass. When he finally looked at her, his voice was a low growl. "They're using you to get to me." Grace's throat tightened. "Then they're right to think I shouldn't be there." His eyes flashed, lethal and blazing. "Don't you dare let them decide that for you." "They already have," she said softly. And in that moment, he saw it. The fracture spreading through everything he'd built, the thing he'd feared most, pressing down on him with merciless weight. Not losing a deal, not losing face, losing her. He closed the space between them in a heartbeat. His hands braced against the wall on either side of her head, caging her in a storm of heat and rain and desperation. "You think walking away will fix this?" His breath scorched her skin, his voice a low, raw snarl. "It won't. It'll wreck me. It'll wreck Lily. And if that doesn't matter to you—" "It matters," she choked out, tears burning like acid. "God help me. It matters too much. That's why I can't stay." The words sliced him open, leaving nothing but fire and ruin in their wake. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cross didn't know where to put his hands. On a deal? On a strategy? On the wreckage of his life bleeding out across a threadbare apartment hallway? Grace stood motionless, her arms wrapped around herself like she could hold the pieces in place. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. He wanted to tear the walls down, drag her back to the only place she belonged. But his voice, when it came, was quieter than the rain dripping from his hair. "I'll go," he said, each word tasting like iron. "But this isn't over." And then he left, the echo of her silence following him down the stairs like a curse. By the time he hit the street, the world had narrowed to two sounds: his heartbeat, savage in his ears, and the roar of the storm ripping through the city. His phone buzzed again. "David." "Ethan," his friend's voice cracked through the line, taut with urgency. "You need to get back. Now the investors are threatening to pull out. Vivian's been fanning the flames, and the board's calling an emergency meeting in 20 minutes. Ethan's laugh was a harsh, humorless sound, swallowed by rain. "Of course she is." "This merger, if it collapses, you lose everything you've built." "Then let it burn." A stunned beat of silence. "You don't mean that." "Oh, I do," Ethan said, his voice a blade of ice cutting through the storm. "Because I just walked away from the only thing that matters, David. And I'm not losing her, too." He hung up before the protests came, spinning on his heel, rain sluicing down his face as resolve locked like iron in his chest. 2 hours later, Grace sat on the edge of her bed, a suitcase yawning open at her feet. Every folded sweater felt like a goodbye she didn't want to write. She told herself this was right. Clean break. No headlines, no scandal, no Lily crying herself to sleep when the vultures ripped everything apart. So why did it feel like her heart was caving in with every breath? A knock shattered the quiet. Sharp, urgent. Her pulse kicked hard enough to bruise as she crossed the floor, bare feet whispering against worn wood. She opened the door, and her world tilted. Ethan stood there. No suit, no tie, just black jeans, rain darkened and clinging, a gray sweater molding to muscle and storm. His hair was a mess of wet ink, his eyes two shards of blue fire burning through the dark. "Ethan," she whispered, her throat raw. "What are you—" "I'm done," he cut in, his voice low and lethal, every word a vow forged in heat. "Done pretending deals matter more than people. Done letting fear decide what I can and can't have. Done losing you because of rules written by people who don't give a damn about us." Grace stared, breath hitching, the room spinning on its axis. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I walked out of that meeting. The one that would have made me $1 billion. His jaw clenched, rain dripping from his lashes like tears he'd never admit. "Because none of it means a damn thing if you're not there." Her heart slammed against her ribs, wild and reckless. You left?" "I burned the bridge," he said, stepping inside, the storm following him in on his boots. "Let them take the deal, the headlines, the whole damn empire. I don't care. I care about this." And then he was in front of her, close enough that the heat of him rolled off like fire, close enough that his breath mingled with hers in the charged space where everything hung trembling on a single word. "You think you're nothing," he rasped, his voice breaking like waves on rock. "But you're the axis my whole world spun on the second you walked into that house. You brought my daughter back to life. You brought me back to life. And if I have to spend every day for the rest of mine proving that to you, I will." Grace's tears spilled hot and fast, carving rivers down her cheeks. "Ethan." His hands lifted, cupping her face with a tenderness that wrecked her completely. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, "and I'll walk out that door and never come back." Her breath hitched, her soul splitting under the weight of every choice that mattered. "I can't," she choked out. The sound he made wasn't human, a low, guttural break of relief and hunger all at once, before his mouth crashed against hers in a kiss that was less kiss and more collision, raw and searing and infinite. The storm outside howled like an anthem as her hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him closer, closer, until the space between them ceased to exist, and everything she'd been running from slammed into everything he'd been starving for. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, his voice of vow etched in fire. "No more running," he said. "Not from me, not from us." Grace closed her eyes, tears mingling with rain on her cheeks, and for the first time in forever, let herself believe in something like home. Hours later, the city glittered under a washed, clean sky. Somewhere in the sprawl, headlines still screamed. Deals still dangled by threads. Empires still burned. But in a small apartment above a quiet street, a billionaire who'd had everything and a woman who thought she was nothing lay tangled in the kind of silence that felt like salvation. Grace walked away to save herself. Ethan walked through fire to bring her back. But if they thought the storm was over, they were wrong. Because love was only the beginning.